So welcome to Origin Stories. My guest this week is Raine. Julie is an engineer who manages tenders and bids for multi-million dollar infrastructure projects and also runs a non-profit called Industry Ready to get more students into engineering and increase the diversity in the industry. You're very welcome to Origin Stories, Julie.
Glad to be here.
Very good, very good. I want to start by asking you about your awards you were nominated recently for, because you've been nominated for, or you were nominated for the Westpac Women of Influence Awards. Tell me a little bit about that. What category were you nominated in, and why?
I was a finalist for the Westpac Women of Influence Awards in Diversity in 2016 and 2020.
Yeah,
So very humbled to be, in that kind of top 10 for New Zealand
yeah,
for, promoting diversity. Um, really part of it is being a female engineer and working towards trying to up our numbers of female engineers in New Zealand. And, ultimately, those figures are low across the world. So, anything I can do to support those figures and come up with some initiatives, pretty much because I've been there.
yeah,
Um, I started in engineering over 30 years ago,
yeah,
and I was definitely the only female for
yeah.
probably a good 10 years of my career in engineering.
Very good. That must have been challenging, and we'll get to that. Can I start? There's a hint of an accent there still, obviously. Where are you from originally, Julie?
Yep. So from England,
Hmm.
and I've been in New Zealand almost 10 years.
Yeah,
And prior to that, I lived and worked for a couple of years in the Middle East.
yeah,
But my engineering career and study was in the UK, and that's obviously where I was born.
yeah. Very good. North of England, correct?
Yes, north
Yeah,
of England is
yeah.
right in the middle. So kind of that Leeds, Wakefield, Doncaster area. I never actually moved within a sort of a 10, 20 mile radius of where I was brought up. And then suddenly, I found myself in the Middle East, and suddenly that's where my travels started. But prior to that, I literally stayed within a 20-mile radius.
Wow, very good. And you didn't have an easy path into engineering. I'm guessing that's one of the reasons that you're so passionate now about, I suppose, helping open the door for other people and making it a bit easier, right?
Yeah, and really, supporting those people who maybe, don't fit into the school life,
Mm,
or, maybe left school without maybe the qualifications that they were hoping for. And, sometimes those people get written off when
mm,
actually I was one of those. So I
right.
left school at 16. I didn't get any qualifications, that were, good enough for university. So that's why I left at 16. I kind of scraped through a sort of a maths basic
Yeah, right.
qualification and a bit of English. Um, but I was left to my own devices from there on in.
Yeah,
And luckily for me, I got a placement I was brought up in a coal mining village.
right,
And luckily, I got a placement in a mining engineering company.
right.
But pretty much, it was the days of the girls did cooking and needlework, and the boys did tech drawing and woodwork. So I hadn't got any, inclination of what even engineering was. And, for those people that left school, you went on what we called in the UK a YTS,
Hmm.
which was like a £25 a week, last resort for students who didn't get through school or go to university. And I did typing. And so, as part of that, I got a placement. So I had to do half a day in reception, and then I managed to get half a day in a drawing office. And consequently, as you can imagine, I hated reception, but I loved my time in the drawing office. Uh,
How did you get a foot in the door in the drawing office? Was that and why? Was it just something you were drawn to, or can you explain why
well,
you
it
were
was
attracted to it?
it was actually the training that I was on. I was always sketching
Hmm.
instead of typing, probably. And when this placement came up, there must have been a discussion about me drawing, and somewhere along the way in this discussion, they said, "Oh well, maybe she could do half a day in the drawing office and half a day on reception." So really, I have to thank the YTS and the system for getting me there. And they then offered me a job after 6 months, and I said, "Look, I really want to stay in the drawing office." And so that's what happened. And I think about after another 6 months, I asked if I could go to college. And when I talk about drawing, I was drawing, there was no computers.
Mm.
I had a board, I had ink pens, tracing paper. And when I rang up the college, they said, "Okay, yep, you can do technical drawing, but you do know it's part of an engineering course." So I said, "Yep, that's absolutely fine." And the next question he said was, "Well, you do know you'll be the only girl?" And I went, "Yes, that's absolutely fine." And that's pretty much how my journey started into engineering.
Well, can I go back a little bit and ask you, like, did you have an aptitude for the drawing side of things? Would you say you had a natural talent for it, or?
Yeah. So for drawing, yes. So my mother was an artist. And so I ultimately would do pencil sketches. And I used to draw portraits. And in fact, in my first job, they used to pay me to draw portraits of the children. And my daughter now, who's 16, is just setting up a business as a animator. So definitely art is in the family.
Oh. The prospect of the notion of doing an engineering course and being the only girl, did that phase you at all?
It didn't phase me. I probably didn't think I would get a degree at that point because I was, in that point of being written off at school, and that's why and that's why I'm an advocate for students who, maybe think that because they didn't get maths and physics that they can't be an engineer. Um, so, yeah, what track were we going on then?
I'll stop you there and ask you about being written off. Did somebody specifically say to you that that you're not cut out for a
Well,
university or?
yeah, literally. At the time that I was at school, if you didn't get the right grades, you didn't really have a choice but to leave.
Hmm.
Yeah, but you couldn't stay on. It was like you got the grades or you didn't. So there was really no option for me to stay on at school. And it wasn't deemed because I didn't get the results at that level. You know, there was no way I was going to get them for staying on for 2 years. Um, So when I started the engineering college, actually in my head, I said to myself, okay, I'll keep going. And when I start failing my exams, I'll know that's my limit. And that's kind of the attitude that I went in at. Now, once I got stuck in, I realized this was a career. And I think that was my passion. I thought, actually, I can have a career. I'm not written off. This is something that I can do. And I think back now, I failed maths at school, yet somehow I had the brains to do the equivalent of a maths degree. Now that's just bizarre to me.
It is.
Um,
It is. I love that notion of kind of just moving the goalposts and saying to yourself, right, I'll see how I go, and if I get past the first year of exams, then we'll just keep going. That's a really clever way of looking at it.
yeah, yeah, that's exactly what I did.
What kind of support or what kind of reaction did you get from family and friends when you went into this, I suppose, very male dominated course and
Oh,
profession?
I can't actually recall any particular reaction. And to be honest, I don't think, I'm not even sure that anybody really knew what engineering was or what I was, doing. You know, um, I mean, I guess the biggest reaction were the people that I was working with because they hadn't had a female in the office before. Um, so probably not so much a reaction from the family, but more reaction from people I was working with. and some of that was negative. Quite a large proportion was negative.
Mm.
But that's not to say that everybody I worked with was negative. I had some great bosses, but I also had some terrible times over, I'd probably say, at least the first 10 years of my career, because I was just young. I was 16, 17, thrown into mining engineering, being the only female. Never, I mean, you can imagine, I've gone from school to going straight into a work environment, and you can imagine things were quite so PC. So, when I saw those calendars on the wall, that was quite an eye opener for me. And, and you don't know how to react to those things. There were no female mentors to look up to. And, my, male colleagues just, carried on oblivious. So,
And what was the support like then from the university, from professors? And I think you told a story about a dean, one particular dean.
yeah.
Can you tell me that story?
Yeah. So again, not really very supportive. Again, pretty neutral, sort of doing the first few years. I did have a particular dean who just didn't seem to, uh, particularly want a female, and would almost, because I was in the minority, almost like, making it a thing, and just made it quite difficult for me. So really of no support whatsoever. So in one instance, I had actually needed to resit an exam, but I was on a like a field course away with this dean. And then when I got back, he said, "Oh, you should have been sitting your exam last week, and now you failed. And so, oh, actually, now you can't get a Bachelor of Honours, which is kind of what you need to be a chartered." And I was like, "No way." And so I fought it all the way, and I won, and I got the chance to take a resit the following year. But really, the comments back were, "Oh, you can't do, you'll never pass. You'll never do your year that you need to do, plus an extra topic on top." Because I mean, it was hard enough just doing the topics that you had, but now I had an extra one to do. And he just was like, "Oh, well, you'll never pass. You'll never get through it." And by golly, I studied day and night to prove him wrong.
And
And so I studied.
you were holding down a job as well at the same time, right? Or yeah,
Yeah. So
in
I studied part time, so worked full time.
yeah.
And so one day I would study, so it would literally be 9 o'clock in the morning till 9 o'clock at night to fit all the subjects in, plus the extra subject that I had to do, plus the travel, because there wasn't anywhere near to where I lived that I could study part time. So it was probably a 2 hour drive to get to university. So I'd leave, when it was dark in the morning, come back when it's dark at night, then all the assignments, and then my job as well.
What you did this for 12 years, right? It took you 12
12 years.
years. What
Yeah.
kept you going for 12 years? What was the pot at the end of the rainbow that made you kind of stick with it and
I
persevere, do you
think
think?
I think really there's a couple of things. There was actually being able to now see that I could have a career, whereas like when I left school, I thought a career wasn't possible. I wanted to make a difference in what I did, and I didn't think that was possible. And then I saw a way with the engineering. Um, I was also liked the challenge of proving people wrong. And I think with most goals, you're either moving away from something or going towards something. And not that I was kind of, well, I suppose I was more moving away, because what I saw growing up was my mum, who was a stay-at-home mum, looked after, the children, didn't have a career, didn't have, any financial independence, and was caught in an abusive relationship and didn't have any way to get out. And I was moving away from that because there was no way that I wanted to ever be in a situation where I wasn't financially independent and that I couldn't have choices as a young adult. So a couple of things really were driving me to make sure I had those things secured.
Well, it's interesting. I was chatting to somebody about this yesterday, and the amount of successful, driven people who come from slightly or very dysfunctional family backgrounds is incredible. Is that something you've come across as well? Just curious on
Yeah,
that.
I think so because I've got a situation now where, I've got my two girls and, they're in a good environment and they're not handed everything on a plate, but I like you've got to do the tough love because I don't want them not to um be focused or motivated.
Hmm.
So I'll give you an example, and I gave this example to my 16-year-old daughter. So um, she's done her NCEAs, and now she's got whatever 12 weeks before she goes back to school. And I've suggested that she might get a job. Which there's not been much effort or motivation in getting a job. And then I relayed like my childhood story where we didn't have money. And I remember I was 12 years old and in the 80s and I wanted this t-shirt. I remember it to this day. It was like a burgundy t-shirt. It had like this white mesh sleeves, and I really wanted one. We didn't have the money to, there's no way my parents could afford anything. So I wanted to get a paper round, and you had to be 13 to get a paper round, but I was 12.
Hmm.
I went to the shop and I convinced the guy to give me a paper round. So I got a paper round at 12 and I did this paper round and I just did it because I knew that I needed the money that
Yeah.
motivated me and the achievement of buying that top has obviously stuck with me for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I think if you do come from a background with, less privileges,
Hmm.
you kind of work harder.
Yeah.
And so now, I have my concern that my children
We all,
need a bit more motivation.
I hear you. I hear you. I've got a 13-year-old as well, and I'm going through very similar challenges, but it's fascinating. Did it get easier after your 12 years and you got your degree? Did things get easier?
Yeah, I think the first, like I always sort of refer to the first 10 years as being the most tricky because I was young. I didn't know what work life was about. I didn't understand what the expectations were, what is acceptable and what's not. Um, and then ultimately, as I got more established and met more people, um, I could see things that I could make a difference with. I also learned to be a bit stronger and a bit more confident. So I would, at least kick back a bit if things were not as, I would, expect them to be. Um, and I went through a lot of bullying. Being bullied as soon as the boss was out the door, and I'd just take it and take it. But I learned to, I guess, stand up for myself. And then, sort of in that next sort of 20 years, there's been more focus on women in the office. We're still low on numbers. We're only at about 13% for New Zealand. I think 8% when I first came here 10 years ago. Uh, so still very
Hmm.
small margins of females and, diversity as a whole. But, things are changing. Um, yeah, way different to what it was when I started.
Yeah, I want to get back to that. I want to ask you, at what stage did you start thinking about life beyond your 20-mile radius? Did you start looking at bigger
Yeah.
opportunities and where engineering could take you?
Yeah, so I'd got quite an established career by then, and I'd got my degree. I'd got chartered as an engineer, which is a big step for any engineer to get chartered. I was working with a consultant who was an international consultant, and they needed some help around the country to start with, around the UK. And I seem to be the person who would, solve problems and
Mm.
go around. So I'd get jobs going around to different cities and helping the transportation teams. And then there was a phone call to say there was a job in the project in the Middle East that they needed help for, and could I go for 2 weeks? So I went for 2 weeks to help them with the project. I presented to the client and I came back. And then the week later, they rang and went, "Oh, well, we need you to do another presentation to the client. Can you come back?" So I went back again for another 2 weeks, and at which point they said, "Can you stay?"
Wow.
And I thought about it and I thought, well, actually, there's nothing stopping me from,
Mm.
saying no. Um, and although you kind of think it's a big thing moving to a different country, it was actually very easy. Now, as soon as I said yes, it was pretty much, a truck comes, they pack up your house, you get on a flight, and then the truck appeared and, you unload. And I remember getting there thinking, well, that wasn't really so hard.
Yeah,
Um,
it's again something that seems to emerge as a theme quite often. Talking to people about their origin stories, a lot of people, in order to be successful, they need to make some of big decisions like that over the course of their life, and once you make one or two of them, they become easier, I suppose. Bigger decisions like that, right?
Yeah, and I mean, that decision was, it wasn't like I went out to find a job. That
Sure.
decision came to me,
Yeah.
and it was just a matter of, well, there's nothing stopping me saying, no. Um, but that did change my life and my perspective, because up to then, I literally thought I had blinkers on, and I thought UK was everything, and it was almost like those blinkers were taken off, and I was like, oh wow, there's a whole world out here.
Yeah.
And
And
and then when I went back to the UK, there was no way I was stopping.
yeah,
So hence
yeah.
New Zealand.
You kept going. How were female engineers treated in the Middle East compared to the north of England?
Yeah, well, being in the Middle East obviously is a completely different culture.
Hmm.
I made sure culturally, doing all the right things. Wasn't too bad being in Abu Dhabi and Dubai, quite westernized. So actually, I didn't come across anything negative. On the positive side, me being me, I'm 110% into when I'm doing things. So I went to class and learnt Arabic. I learnt to speak Arabic and write Arabic, so that when I could speak to my Arabic clients, I could introduce myself. Now, I'm not saying I was great at Arabic, but I could say who I was, introduce a colleague, and say the basics of, my family and having two children. But that really paved the way for me, because there were other engineers that had been there for many years and not bothered learning the language. And so, I do find that, going the extra mile really helps. So I got a really positive response. And, it's like in the Middle East, everything is just amazing.
Hmm.
The engineering projects are out of this world. So it
T-
really was.
Tell me about some of them. Tell me about some of the projects you worked on and the kind of size of the teams, I suppose, you managed and were responsible for.
Yeah, so when I was, so my specialization is transportation. So I was working on things like the Palm Jebel Ali. So that's the Palm Islands in Dubai. So you've got the one that's already built. And, here's a lot of footballers and famous people with their places on there. So they built another one next to it. So I designed the transport on and off of that palm. Um, and that hasn't actually been complete, because everything crashed in 2009 when I was there. So that's still ongoing. But yeah, I designed the light rail system on there. The other projects, another two projects, which was amazing, was one called Desert Island, owned by a sheikh. and he wanted to build an ecosystem holiday resort. And so I designed the transport on there. And coming from England, I was thinking of how I would do that. And ultimately, I used the London Underground as my sort of thoughts to
Yeah,
do that. And what I did was I used how they use the colours on the London Underground, because I thought, well, people will travel from different countries, and you could get the purple line up to the Eco Hotel and the red line here.
yeah.
So that was really good, and that is actually built. Um, and the final one that I worked on was Mazda City, which was the world's carbon neutral city, which is also quite interesting in the Middle East, because you've got you know the sort of project trying to be carbon neutral, but you've got people with aircon and big cars and
Sure.
lots of money, and there's a
Yeah.
bit of a contrast between those projects. But that one is built as well,
So,
so
so that was the world's first carbon neutral city. They
yeah,
were the
carbon
very first.
neutral city. Yeah.
Very good, cool. So were you managing a team of people over there as well, or
Yeah, a big team.
yeah,
So there'd be a big team of us, and then we'd be broken down into different sectors. So, infrastructure design or structural design, transportation. So, I would have a team, and true, UAE style
mm,
is, although I'm a transportation engineer, if you can imagine in the UK, we're dealing with, buses, trains, cyclists, pedestrians. I went over to the Middle East, and suddenly I was dealing with, you know, airports and maritime and ferries.
yeah,
And, it was really, you're in at the deep end, you sink or swim,
yeah,
and you've got to suddenly learn all different types of transport. So that was really interesting. And the other thing is, um, you call on experts. So although I was there, I'd have a team of experts from literally around the world. There'd be an aviation specialist here, and we'd call in a specialist from, Hong Kong or Australia. And it
mm,
really was a worldwide effort.
yeah. Again, largely male dominated, and if so,
Very much.
what strategies and tools did you develop, I suppose, to deal with that?
Well, I think, like I said before, I'd kind of got stronger
Yeah,
after I realized, I guess when I first started, I didn't understand, minorities and diversity and all those words that we use today.
mm,
And I guess as my career developed, I did realize that I was a female. Now, funnily enough, what happened was, as a minority, whether it be female or whatever minority in, you try and mix and just, disappear and vanish and,
blend,
you know,
blend in.
not stand out.
Yeah,
And then one day I remember opening my wardrobe, and I literally morphed into a male. So I was wearing trouser suits. I was wearing shirts with cufflinks, and I was wearing flat, sort of brogue type shoes.
right.
And I didn't even realize it had happened. And it
Yeah,
obviously happened over a certain amount of time. And I can remember in the UK, particularly on a Monday, on the Sunday night, I would watch all the football results. So on the Monday, I would have something to talk about and try and fit in. Um, but then I changed that, and I thought, actually, no, I am a female in a
mm,
male-dominated environment. So I wanted to embrace that. And from that day when I realized everybody knows me, I'll wear a dress and high heels. Doesn't matter where I am, unless I'm on site, of course.
yeah,
Um, but I'll wear a dress and high heels
yeah.
and actually embrace that I'm a female in a male dominated environment.
Was that empowering? That was like a stake in the ground, saying "this is me"
Yeah,
kind of thing. Yeah.
yeah, definitely.
Mm,
Like, this is me. I'm not, I guess before I was trying to be, look and feel and talk
mm,
and do those things. You tend to learn strategies as you go along. And I do teach those strategies in some of the work that I do now in, confidence.
Right.
Even if you're not confident, you can look confident. So I
Yeah.
use those strategies a lot. Also, how to manage a meeting, especially if I would be in so many meetings and it would just be a boardroom of, what I would call middle-aged men and me.
Mm.
And you feel quite intimidated. And definitely you get that feeling where, and you can use it to your advantage. And these are the kind of things I started to do. So, for example, I'd be in a meeting and I'd almost not want to say anything because as soon as I'd say anything, I'd feel as though the whole room would kind of silence and all slowly turn and look to
Right.
see what she had to say.
Okay.
And then all eyes on me. And I'm thinking, well, if I was just a guy in this room, it wouldn't be like that.
Yeah.
But I learned to use that to my advantage because suddenly I thought, actually, when I talk, they are listening to
Mm.
me.
Yep.
So I can use that as more of an advantage and not a disadvantage.
Yeah.
So just things like that I learned. I learned how to, hold my own in a meeting. That classic where you say something and you get no reaction and then somebody else says it.
Yep.
And then they go, oh, great idea.
Yeah.
You're thinking, you're going, well, I said that 10 minutes ago.
Yeah. Right. There's a bit of that.
Um,
Very good. So, when and why did you make the move from the Middle East to New Zealand?
Okay, so when I was in the Middle East, I was there 2008 and 2009,
Mm.
and as you may remember, there was a financial global
Yeah.
crash,
Yeah.
and especially Dubai because they were real estate.
Sure.
Pretty much all the whole country just shut down, and you may remember, stories in the paper where expats by the thousands left.
Mm.
They would leave the cars in the car park with the credit cards and sorry notes and just get on a flight and leave.
Wow. Yeah. Right.
Um, Now, I did actually stay, mainly because it's illegal to be in debt in the Middle
Yes.
East. You will
Okay.
get thrown into prison. And I didn't want to cut off my options of ever going back.
Yeah.
So I did stay for a few months and, sort out all my finances. And then ultimately I moved back to the UK for a year.
Yeah.
But then always looking for an opportunity, and hence my opportunity was to come to New Zealand to work on, at the time they had the 7 roads of national significance.
Sure. Yeah.
And so I came over to work on the transportation
Cool.
network here.
Was that with Downers? Who was that
I
with?
came with a company called URS.
Okay.
Ultimately, I got offered a job with NZTA.
Okay.
I was working with URS, who were an international company, and I'd worked with them in the UK and the Middle East, and they didn't want me to leave. So
Cool.
they pretty much counter offered and said, look, we've got an office in New Zealand. You choose which one you want to go to. So I came with my company I'd been working with.
Okay.
It
Cool.
was a fairly good transition.
Cool.
And then after 3 years, I worked with Downer for 5 years as
Oh,
their bid
very
manager,
cool.
which consequently led me into, helping smaller construction companies win multi-million dollar contracts.
Very good. And then the decision, I guess the next big decision was to go out on your own, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, in the UK, it's much easier to work as a contractor. So I had worked as what we call a contractor for 12 years in the UK. So where I would work for myself and you'd work for various different organizations on projects, so
Mm.
project by project. Now, it's not really such a thing as such here. So here, people set up as, sole traders.
Yeah.
It's the same concept, but just slightly different. So yeah, after I'd been here 7 years, um, I had a good network of people. Bearing in mind, the day that I came, I'd never been to New Zealand before.
Yeah.
I didn't have any family here. I knew absolutely no one.
Right.
But 7 years in, I'd built up a good network. And ultimately, I made that decision, which is a tough decision,
Mm.
to go out on my own because, you're kind of not in your home country as such. You
Mm.
don't have any family support.
Yeah.
And ultimately, you're giving up a monthly salary to
Mm.
go out on your own. But the best decision.
Great. And not only did you go out on your own and set up a company doing bids and tenders, you've since kind of diversified into a couple of other different areas. The first being industry ready, and then the second is public speaking and leadership coaching, and I suppose inspiring people is your tagline anything is possible? Is that your one of your
Yep,
taglines?
yep.
I love it.
Anything is possible.
Mm.
Definitely
Mm.
anything is possible. If you go from leaving school with nothing, yeah, anything is possible. And my other one is leveling the playing field, which is, just about supporting those minority groups in whatever way or shape or form it comes in. Um, but yeah, so pretty much I've always, I guess, been, seen as a mentor and a coach, leading the way in terms of being a female in engineering. So that kind of naturally happened. Um, and I would kind of be the one that would speak on diversity and inclusion. So then, progressing that to speaking at conferences was also kind of a bit of a natural progression to get the message out there. Um, when I came here, I joined the Committee for Engineering New Zealand, which is our institute. And that has been a great way for me to meet people and network. But ultimately, I became the chair for Engineering New Zealand Auckland branch. So this will be my third year. Um, but in terms of diversity, I'm only the third female to hold that position in 100 years.
Wow.
So that fills me with great pride, but it also gives me a great platform to speak a message of diversity and inclusion and leveling the playing field.
And when you say diversity and inclusion, industry ready is not just for females. It's obviously anybody who's looking to get into engineering who may feel at a
Yeah.
disadvantage.
Yeah, so what I found when I was on the committee was there didn't seem to be a national platform where young engineers, when they are doing their degree or finishing their degree, they do need to get out into industry. So whilst they're doing the degree, they have to have, somewhere between 400 and 800 hours of work in the industry
Hmm.
before they get their, certificate. And then obviously when they finish the degree, they'll be looking for a position. And there didn't seem to be one solution that could help the students or the universities help the students
Right.
or for industry. And so I created a national platform actually during COVID lockdown. Um, and the whole purpose of it is for students to have one place to, upload a profile and one place for the companies to connect, but ultimately for leveling the playing field. Not so it's for all engineers, but really for those things I've talked about today is, being a female in engineering, being, not being judged on what grades you've got or what university you're at. So again, leveling the playing field of, just because you're not an A grade student, you're not written off.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, when I did do my degree, I was not an A grade student. I scraped through on some B's and C's. So, didn't mean to say I wasn't a great
No.
engineer. So really just, getting that message across. And also for our immigrant engineers to help them as well, especially with the culture. And again, myself being there in the Middle East, learning the culture and
Sure.
understanding, and to some respect here in New Zealand because there's a different culture here.
Sure.
So they're kind of the three minority areas that I'm working with, but it is ultimately for all engineers and for all organizations and companies to be able to match with the student. So as we do the matching, we eliminate all unconscious bias. And
Very
that's
good.
the whole purpose of it.
Very good. On top of all that, you managed to write a book, which I believe is being launched next week. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so actually a book not related to engineering,
Yeah.
but a book related to my family in the UK. And we, in the UK when you've got these small villages and you've got the butchers, the bakers, and we had the blacksmiths of the family, which was our family. So we looked after the horses, and ultimately, when cars came along, we were the petrol station. And so you would stay in your village. You wouldn't really travel. So it's a story about history, education, and some fun stories about school. And what I like about it is, as part of the education, there's a piece in there from Sir Alec Clegg, who changed the way that schools ran in the late 50s and 60s, and to eliminate children being written off for not being A grade students back then. And so I really found that connection.
Very good.
Uh, and so it's a third generation book. And yeah, I did launch it in the UK last year, but I really wanted to launch it in New Zealand as well.
Congrats on that. Great, great achievement. Good stuff. One final question. If you could go back in time and give some advice to your 16-year-old self, leaving school at 16, what would you say?
Have the confidence, that anything is possible. And I
Mm.
didn't believe it then. But having the confidence, and like I said, even if you haven't got the confidence to look confident, I would probably ask more questions. I never really questioned things. I think as a young engineer, I just accepted too much. So I think I would go back and just ask, uh, you know, way more questions like, why are those calendars on the wall?
That's a good question. Brilliant. Listen, thank you so much for your time. Really, really enjoyed chatting with you, Julie.
Perfect. No, it's been great to chat with you
And
too.
all the very best with your book. Take care.
Okay. Thanks, Rob.
Cheers, Julie.